Good afternoon and welcome to today's Lunch and Look at Home, exploring the EI Couse home and studio. We are so glad to have you here with us. I am Jennifer Rastari Dickinson, Director of Education here at the Stark Museum of Art in Orange, Texas. And we have got a great program planned for you today. We're going to give people just 1 or 2 minutes to go ahead and log in and get join us, and then we'll get started. Davison Koenig at the Couse-Sharp Historic Site is online with us and ready to give us an incredible tour of their the Couse home and studio. So we'll get started here in just a few minutes. I'm seeing some familiar faces. Good morning, Sarah, and hello, Tad. Glad to see you this morning. A couple of housekeeping things before we get started. We will be recording today's session. If you do not want your recording on that video, you can turn off your camera. I'm also going to ask that you mute your microphone while we're in the program. If you have questions, which we hope you do during the program, we'll ask you to use that chat function. I will be monitoring it, as well as a staff member, Regina from the Couse-Sharp Historic Site. So we'll be able to answer questions live throughout the tour for you. Just 1 more minute and we're going to get started. And today we're going to start today's program with a video that the Couse-Sharp Historic Site produced for our special exhibition, The West is Home, in collaboration with us. This is a great introduction to the Taos Society of Artists, EI Couse, and their site. So we'll take a look at that video before we connect with Davison and the Couse-Sharp Historic Site. So we'll give people just 1 more minute while I queue up this video.
Hello, my name is Davison Koenig. I am the Executive Director and Curator of the Couse-Sharp Historic Site in Taos, New Mexico. We are a 2-acre campus that is the home and studios of E.I. Couse and J.H. Sharp, 2 of the founders of the Taos Society of Artists. And we are standing here in the Couse Garden where many of the TSA gatherings were held. Joseph Henry Sharp was the first to visit Taos in 1893. While studying in Paris, he regaled fellow artists Ernest Blumenschein and Bert Phillips with descriptions of the land and people of Taos Valley and the artistic potential. Embarking on a fateful wagon journey in 1898, Ernest Blumenschein and Bert Phillips discovered for themselves the wonder and attraction of Taos Valley. What they found was a verdant valley with varied topography, from the depths of the Rio Grande Gorge to the heights of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. But more importantly, they found a culturally diverse community, with the native people of Taos Pueblo, the Hispano descendants of Spanish colonizers, and the more recent Anglo settlers. They also discovered the magic Taos light, unmatched in its clarity and depth. In other words, an artist's paradise. They also benefited from and appreciated the openness found to outside cultures. Taos was a center of trade long before the Spanish entrada. Besides the commercial trade came the exchange of ideas, thus fertile ground for artists. This is the home they found in Taos. We are now stepping into the Couse studio, which was built in 1909 and remains much as it was at the time of the artist's death in 1936. What began as a seasonal pilgrimage to Taos became the permanent home for the artist. And I believe it is this distinction that makes the Taos Art Colony unique among its contemporaries and what makes the work of the Taos artists so profound. Phillips wrote to Blumenschein during his first weeks in Taos, "There is scarcely a day but at least 2 or 3 Indians are here, and I really like them and enjoy having them around. Their friendship is sincere, and they appreciate the way we treat them as equals." Slowly word spread, and the Taos Art Colony was born. In 1915, 6 artists formed the Taos Society of Artists with the shared vision of creating a uniquely American art with the expressed goal of preserving the native arts. The people they were portraying where they're neighbors, friends, and sometimes even family. Ben Lujan, Couse's favorite model, who helped Virginia Couse build and maintain the garden, became known as Ben Couse, and his great-grandchildren still carry the Couse middle name to this day. A singular brilliance of the TSA was their self-promotion through traveling exhibitions, which they called circuit shows. Realizing they were stronger together, the artists curated, organized, and shipped exhibitions around the country, leveraging the connections of the whole group. Imagine if you had been steeped in the Hudson River School, walking into an exhibition filled with light, Taos light, filled too with color, mystery, and Native and Hispano people as the subject and figuring prominently in the foreground. This amounted to a new, exciting vision of America. The TSA weren't the only painters of the period, with a refreshingly colorful palette depicting the West, but they were doing it as a group, with a shared vision, and a unique lived perspective of the West. During this period, Americans' exposure to Native Americans was largely through popular culture depictions of a mythic vanishing West. The TSA, on the other hand, depicted the integrity of Native people in activities of daily life, domestic tranquility, agrarian work, contemplative moments, and ceremonial obligations. Quite simply, their depictions of the West deeply influenced people's perceptions, conscious or unconscious, of the West and of Native people. Henry Sharp writes, "I try to present the Indian as he is, mentally as well as physically, not as ephemeral fiction has delighted to picture him, but as a human being endowed with intelligence, swayed by nobility of thought, animated by craftiness, or calmed by reveries of bygone days." The Taos Society of Artists disbanded in 1927, having largely outlived its usefulness, as the artists had become household names and their town synonymous with great art. Taos became a draw for collectors and cultural tourists alike, those willing to brave hardship to travel to our remote and exotic locale. Some came only for a season, but others stayed. Artists and intellectuals from around the world would meet in this unlikely cauldron of creativity, to talk art theory, to critique each other's work, and to challenge themselves and their peers. The TSA were well aware of their prestige and influence. The Pueblo models became not merely passive sitters, but agents of social change through their depictions and, most importantly, their relationships with the artists. They came for the awe-inspiring Taos Valley, the mercurial quality of light, the colorful native pageantry, and a rhythm of life dictated by changing seasons and long-standing tradition. By pooling their skills and resources, what these 12 men and women achieved together far outweighs their significance as individual artists. The TSA opened the door for all the artists that followed and created a model of what a determined, competitive, highly talented group with a shared vision could accomplish.
All right. So that gives us a great introduction to the Couse-Sharp Historic Site and the Taos Society of Artists. And I am going to oops, hold on just a second. Let's see here. Let me find us. Here we go. Get Davison on screen. Give me just 1 second. There we are. Perfect. Davison, good morning. Welcome.
Good morning, everyone.
All right.
Welcome to the Couse House.
And with that, I'm going to turn us over to Davison Koenig at the Couse-Sharp Historic Site. As I mentioned before, I, as well as Regina from the Couse-Sharp Historic Site, will be monitoring the chat room. If you have questions, please use that chat function and add them. I know Davison is hoping to have some questions along the way as we go.
Absolutely.
All
So
right.
welcome, folks. This will be an abbreviated tour of our normally 2-hour docent-led visitor experience. And we're going to try to keep this informal. So yeah, feel free to posit any questions in the chat room, and I'll see if I can answer them along the way. But we'll also save some time at the end for questions. So welcome. We're standing in the Couse bedroom. There's 11 rooms in the Couse home. We're going to visit 5 or 6 of those along our tour. This is one of the many fireplaces throughout the home. One of my favorites with these beautiful Tsuke Pueblo tiles embedded. And you'll see just great architectural features throughout the home that really make it unique as a great example of New Mexico vernacular architecture. The home dates from basically 1839 to the 1930s when the last additions are done. This portion here was added in the 1850s by a gentleman, Quinn, who was a local attorney in Taos and business partner of Kit Carson. I want to point out this nice little Taos Pueblo, Tsuke Pueblo, or not Tsuke, Picaris Pueblo cook pot here on this hand-forged trivet. It's kind of fun. Taos Pueblo's pottery is micaceous with flecks of mica. You can see a little bit of sparkle still in the pot, but largely these are real functional utilitarian cookware is what Taos Pueblo was famous for. And that would have been a trade item here in the early 20th century. Oh, let's see, what else? One of the things that makes the Couse home and studio important on a national level is that we can take a painting like this treasure jar over here that Couse did, and this is actually a period framed print, but we can look at any one of the 2,500 plus paintings that Couse does during his career, and we have all the related material. So we have the so-called treasure jar here is actually a San Ildefonso black on red pot. And then we have everything that the model, Jerry Mirabal, is wearing. So for example, and I'm going to pick up a few items. We have the original contact print that is the photo study for the painting that clearly shows Jerry Mirabal of Taos Pueblo. We have the moccasins that he's wearing, these beautiful plains moccasins with a Thunderbird. We have a early Navajo concha belt. We have plains leggings. Everything featured in the painting is still in the Couse home and collection. And that's what makes this home archive collection one of the most important in the country. And I believe it is the largest extant collection when you include the home, the studios, the collections, the archives of any artist of this national stature in the country. Should we point out some of the photographs here just so we can introduce the models? So upper left here, we have the Ben Lujan that we mentioned in that primer, and that's his son Eliseo with him. Ben modeled for Couse for 34 years until Couse passed in 1936. And here we have Ben, his wife Antonita, and then there's Jerry Mirabal again. And Ben Lujan and Jerry Mirabal were the primary models for Couse, Ben posing exclusively for Couse. Jerry posed a lot for Henry Sharp. He appears in many of the paintings. So we are now stepping into the Couse sitting room. And the paintings in here largely depict his period, his early study in Paris, beginning in 1886. where he meets his future wife, Virginia Walker. She was traveling alone to Paris to study as an artist, where they both meet at Académie Julian. They meet in 1887 and are married 2 years later. But here we see Couse developing his style, experimenting with color, light, composition, spending summers along the Calais coast. And the painting here over the Murphy pull-out bed from their New York studio shows his young wife with their newborn son, Kibby Whitman Couse, who's born in 1894 in Paris. And over here, the Couses traveled back to Washington State. Virginia Walker was, her family owned the Walker Ranch in central Washington along the Columbia River. And this painting over the mantle here actually is an allegory for their decision to return to America, for him to work and pursue painting Native Americans. So here we have Virginia pulling the artist Irving Couse by the reins reluctantly to return to America and begin his artistic career. So they spend several years at the Walker Ranch. In fact, her family builds Irving a beautiful stone studio, which is pictured here in the foreground with the lights on, where he began painting Native Americans for the first time. But he had trouble finding models in the Pacific Northwest, which is eventually what brings him to Taos. And there's an interior scene of his studio at the Walker Ranch. And I love that nocturnal scene also of the Walker Ranch and irrigation ditch.
Davison, we have a question. Do you have any works by his wife, by Virginia?
No, sadly, we do not. She studies at the Académie Julian, but when they return to the States and move to Taos, she never really pursues her artistic career. And in fact, she puts her artistic energies into building the garden here at the Couse house. So yeah, I so wish that we had examples of her work. And I hope that someday something will materialize, because surely she produced a fair amount of work while she was studying in Paris. So there has to be stuff out there. So if anybody finds anything at an auction, flea market, please do let us know, because man, that would be great to have. Thank you. Good question. I want to point out some fun architectural features. We have these doors with cutout painted wood designs that we believe were produced by Kibby's first wife, Lucille. We think Kibby and Lucille worked collaboratively on these. And in fact, some of these are influenced or inspired by some of the pottery designs that we'll see in the Couse studio. But I just love these kind of deco period iconography that we see. So we are now stepping into the Couse dining room. This is the oldest room on the property. This dates to 1839. If you'll notice, these original vigas or beams on the ceiling here still show their bark. We had these tree ring dated at the University of Arizona Dendrochronology Lab, and they date to 1839. So that definitively tells us when the Couse home construction begins. This was a one-room Spanish home built by Pedro Luna for his family. It would have had probably one door and one original window to keep the heat in. And you'll notice low doorways throughout the house. Contrary to popular belief, people were not that short that long ago. It was actually to keep the heat in, as all of these homes would have been heated by wood, by fire. But this is a great example of the tastes of the period and what people were surrounding themselves with. And I should mention that at the Couse House, preservation and authenticity is kind of the foundation and the hallmark of what we do. So we don't really make stuff pretty, but we try to keep it as original as possible, because the strength of our story is what was life like at the turn of the last century when these artists leave the East Coast and move out west, and move to this very unlikely, seemingly unlikely remote outpost to build one of the most important art colonies of the early 20th century. So we have a mixture of furniture in here that kind of shows what was in vogue. Most of it is shipped out in 1928 when the artist moves here full time. We have this nice highboy here in the corner. We have paintings of their son Kibby as a young boy, and then later as a young man at college at the Stevens Institute in Newark, New Jersey, where he studies mechanical engineering. We have a nice arts and crafts mission style dining room table with these kind of Spanish colonial meets arts and crafts revival chairs that were produced locally here in Taos. In fact, the Sharps living next door admired these chairs so much they had a set made, but Henry Sharp's wife didn't think they were that comfortable, so she actually sold them to the Blumenshines, and the Blumenshines still have these chairs at their dining room table, which is kind of fun. We have Blue Willow China here, denimware from Massachusetts, which is some of my favorite. It's a little more arts and crafts style. And you see these cute little bunny rabbits, kind of adorable. And then the majority of the paintings in the room are largely studies that Couse does while in Paris. So part of the artist's academic training would have been to go to the Louvre and actually set up an easel and copy master works. So here we have Saint Sebastian being administered to. This is a painting by Ribot, who is French. And also notice these nice handmade frames. These are all made by Irving Couse himself with Finnish lumber that he would have bought at Randall's Lumber Yard here in Taos. But I love that he starts making his own frames when he moves to Taos to frame his earlier work. We have a copy of a Rembrandt. Surely no artist could study without studying Rembrandt. Another beautiful fireplace here with a Spanish bulto or sculpture of Catholic saint. And you'll notice all the shiny brass. I think brass was very much in vogue. So some of this would have been stuff that they picked up at flea markets in Paris and other stuff that they acquired from New York to Taos. But it's a great kind of period, slightly deco design in the fireplace. So it's a little bit Pueblo Revival meets Art Deco with the organic lines and then the very square lines. There's a nice painting here by Couse's friend Rittenhouse of Eanger Irving Couse, who largely went by Irving, but signed all of his work E.I. Couse. Straighten that. And then to the left, we have his dad, Moses, that Irving painted. And over here, we have his lovely wife, Virginia, who, not surprisingly, often posed for the artist because she was very affordable and he was just a little smitten. Wrapping around the room, this is another early painting that the artist does from the Louvre, and I'm going to put some light on this if I can, just so we can do a little detail. But this is a great example of how the artist's work develops rather quickly. So the artist is born in Saginaw, Michigan, and grows up in Saginaw, Michigan. drops out of high school in his sophomore year, studies at the National Academy of Design in New York, and then travels to Paris in 1886, as we mentioned. So he doesn't have that much early fundamental training, but is mostly self-taught. But within a couple of years of his study in Paris, this is the quality of work that he's doing, which is pretty magnificent. So this is a painting, Deposition of Christ, painted by a Spanish painter, Ribera. Really one of my favorites. And I love that we still have so many examples that document his career from early years, even from his high school years, all the way until his death. But this is a great piece. So thank you for indulging me. I also like to point out the lampshade here over the dining room table. This is actually deerskin, here handmade by the artist Ralph Myers. Some of you may be familiar with. He was a contemporary of the Taos artists here in Taos. He also ran one of the curio shops, Indian curio shops. But he also did interior design, as it turns out, and handmade many kind of Southwest inspired things for people's homes, including the Philmont Ranch just over the hill in Cimarron was entirely furnished by Ralph Myers and includes many of his own creations. Okay, so we will now pass through the kitchen and head into the sala. So we are now in the sala, or formal living room, of the Couse family. And this was actually the front door to the home. So by the 1920s, these artists had become household names. And if you were traveling to Taos to meet the famous Couse of Taos, you would have come out onto the portal, seen the beautiful gardens and the view, knocked on the front door. Virginia would answer the door, perhaps offer you some coffee or tea, and Irving would take a break from the easel, and you would talk art. And he would have had his latest, greatest Indian paintings on the wall, so this would have served also as a gallery in some ways. What we have now on the walls, for example, are several pieces that he does for the Paris salons in the 1890s. This is a piece titled L'Agony, The Agony. And is a gentleman in his deathbed. It's actually the models in the upper right is the Couse's landlady in Paris and her daughter there with the candle. But this is a great example of what was in vogue during this period. What the academy, what the academic art world expected of artists were these large, dripping with sentimentality, a dark palette. And this really gives you a great example of kind of what the artists are rebelling against. The artists are all in Paris, they're meeting at the cafes, and they're discussing the future of art, and specifically the future of American art. And they're saying, we need to create something uniquely American. And this is what inspired, this shows you their springboard from where the Taos artists are studying to where they arrive later in Taos. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Another fabulous fireplace here. And around flanking this fireplace are these beautiful examples of New Mexico folk art that are the Catholic saints. And we really have a great collection that basically documents all of the most well-known Santeros or Santo carvers and painters from Santa Fe to Taos to Arroyo Hondo. And these date to largely the late 1700s through the 1800s. But as I like to say, the artists are here at the right time, and they're just able to acquire amazing material culture. And what's fabulous is all of this stays in the home. And it's not behind glass, and you as a visitor can experience this in person. And that's
Davison,
for
were the
yeah,
Santos on, were they up in the house, when the house was restored or preserved? Were these up?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. These were all preserved in the house. These several rooms in the house that we're in now, the dining room, the sala, the studio, really kind of stayed time capsules, and most everything stayed on the walls for the last 100 years. Is what's kind of amazing. And that's what makes another thing that makes the house so unique is that it's not a recreation, it's not period furniture. But when the artist dies in 1936, his son Kibbe returns to the East Coast and literally shutters the house so that most everything stays as it was. The paintings have moved around. We've created a little bit of a chronological narrative as you move through the house for the visitor experience. But yeah, everything remains is what's kind of spectacular.
Davison, before we move on, I've got another question just with the Santos. Was the Couse family practicing Catholics?
Good question. No, they were not. I would say the Couses were, I would say Irving Couse was certainly spiritual, but he wasn't necessarily religious. To our knowledge, they never attended church regularly in Taos. They even have a menorah on the mantle. No, mostly it was just he really appreciated, and this is what brought them to Taos and kept them in Taos, was he really appreciated the native cultures, Taos Pueblo, the Hispano culture, and the saints were so integral to Hispano culture, and he appreciated this artwork and this expression, and so collected them really to be surrounded by them as beautiful pieces of art and inspiration more than he collected them as religious icons for the family's use. But we're fortunate because this is the largest collection in Taos that's still in a home. Many of these pieces collected by Mabel Dodge and others later go to New York or wind up in museums across the country. But really nice to have these still here in Taos, so close to where many of them are produced. On this wall, we have another painting produced for the Paris Salon. This piece is titled All Saints Day. And this is a great example of our archives and collections in that we have photographs that Couse took as studies for this painting that show these very people in this setting that he used to create this composition. We also have this beautiful little painting sketch that he does, because of course the photography, which Couse, basically the camera really develops in the 1880, 1890s while the artists are in Paris. And this gives them an opportunity to use the camera as a tool, but it's black and white photography. So great for light and composition, but to capture the color, the artist still had to do plein air paintings so that then they could later go into the studio and reproduce what they saw outside. And then we also have some beautiful Spanish colonial furniture. This is one of my favorite blanket chests. I just love the subtleties of the stain and color. And this is a really great piece that speaks to what a cultural isolate New Spain, Nuevo Mexico, becomes, in that this is probably done in the late 1700s, early 1800s. But originally, these would have been lions of Seville. But over time, the Spanish colonists have now been so separated from Mother Spain that the iconography really, to me, looks more like a New Mexico dog. So that speaks to that cultural isolation and how long the people have been away from their mother country and culture, and that they really create their own culture here in New Mexico. But it's really an exquisite piece with beautiful hand-wrought ironwork. And then sitting atop it is this beautiful San Juan Pueblo, or Okewinge, storage jar. It's just a great example of what the people are doing for use and for trade. But just a beautiful black polish piece. We can still see all the polish marks from a corn cob on the interior, completely uniform and symmetrical. And these would have been traded throughout the northern frontier. And these would have been very popular with the Spanish colonialists, because what the pottery that the Pueblos were making was pretty much the most superior quality that could be found anywhere in the Americas. These bancos date to the previous owner, Quinn, that we mentioned earlier. So these have been in the house for well over 100 years. Original stain. I love that kind of copper green color. More brass, more copper throughout the house. And then here are some other really fine examples of Spanish colonial furniture from the 19th century. These are cochety style chairs. If we can zoom in closely, you can actually see these are carved ram's heads, going up in very early examples, and to have a pair is pretty remarkable.
Davison, we're losing you just a little bit.
Yeah.
We're losing our connections just a little, as we zoom in, we're losing a little bit of our connection.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, the Zoom probably pushes it. Okay, well, we're about to step into the Couse studio where we'll get better reception.
Excellent.
But I do want to point out this painting of Virginia Walker Couse, titled "The Milkmaid," that Couse painted while they were at the Walker Ranch, and this is in the Chicago Exposition in 1893. But it's really one of my favorite paintings in the collection. Just the way he captures that morning light is pretty impressive, and it's just a great portrait of Virginia. Really kind of a fabulous piece, and we're fortunate to still have it in the collection. So with that, let us head into the studio. So when the Couses purchased the property in 1909, the first thing that Irving does is he takes this room, he takes this original room, removes the vigas in the ceiling, and blows it up and creates this giant light-filled studio. And you see these shingle glass windows above, true north. This is what the artist would have seen in Paris at the ateliers that they reproduced here in Taos. There are 3 remaining shingle glass Taos Society of Artists studio windows in existence. All 3 of them are here at the Couse-Sharp Historic Site. You'll see painting of Mr. Couse over his desk, flanked by his Tsuke rain god friends. And then you'll see these shelves of pottery wrapping around the studio. And while people often assumed that these were merely props for his paintings, he only uses about a dozen of these in paintings and collects over 152 large vessels. And you see how he actually builds out the shelf by building up the adobe wall so that he can be surrounded by these pieces, which he finds great inspiration in.
Davison, when we chatted the other day, you pointed out to me that those walls with the shelves, that he did add those. Those were not there, that it was originally flush, and that he built them out and built that for the collection, correct?
Correct. Yeah, I love the idea that he sacrificed studio space, square footage in his studio, just so he could be surrounded by all these beautiful pots. But it's a really exquisite collection. It basically documents 1890 to about 1925. And this is arguably the most exciting period in native pottery, with the most avant-garde things happening, because there's so much outside influences coming into the northern Pueblos. And there's this huge commercial market that's now created with the advent of the railroad, and and Santa Fe in particular. And one of my favorite pieces is this beautiful Zuni Water Jar. This dates to about 1890. But again, great example of what was made as purely utilitarian. but the importance of beauty in everyday life, rain clouds and water, because this is a water jar. So naturally, we see this indentation in the bottom so that it could be placed upon a woman's head to be carried from the river to the home. We see this wear along the rim, which was probably from either dipping it into the river to fill with water and or from the ladle that would have been placed here to pull the water out. But it's just really an exquisite piece. This is also really this is what inspires Taos moderns who follow the Taos Society of Artists in some ways, who really reduce things to a more elemental form. And much of their inspiration comes from Pueblo pottery, from textiles and basketry.
Davison,
So
do
we
we
have
know if
over
Couse,
25 original, yeah.
I was going to ask, do we know if Couse had a favorite piece of pottery that he really preferred?
That is a really good and tough question. Hard to say. I mean, there's several pieces that appear a lot in paintings. But it's hard, you know, I wish we had more on that. Unfortunately, we have all the writings from his wife Virginia from till the artist till Virginia's death in 1929. But we have very little writings from Irving Couse. I don't think he was much of a letter writer. So unfortunately, we have very little information firsthand on that. But my guess is it was kind of like picking your favorite child. I think Couse had a lot of favorites on the walls here, would be my guess. So here we have an unfinished canvas on Couse's easel. We have his tabouret with his palette, his brushes, and I did not artfully arrange his brushes. That is how they were. I think Mr. Couse was a little OCD and very much a man of process. So with the advent of photography, he realized that was a very useful tool, and he would produce a one-to-one photograph for any painting that he produced. And in that, I mean, the photograph was not inspiration. It was actually, he worked out the composition and light with that photograph, would grid the photograph, and then put that on the canvas and reproduce it. However, the real caveat is he would work directly from life. So even if it was an exterior outside painting of, say, Taos Canyon, he would bring the models back into the studio and work directly from life here on the model stand. And we also have here in the studio his original darkroom. So in this darkroom, he produces over 11,000 nitrate negatives and 11,000 contact prints. No running water, no electricity, a kerosene red lamp, and yeah, his developing trays, everything here as he left them is kind of remarkable. And if you were standing here with me now, you could actually smell the developer. We also have all of his plein air boxes ready, at the ready for Mr. Couse to head out into the field. So we just recently, we digitized all 11,000 contact prints, and we're now in the process of digitizing all of his glass plate negatives and his nitrate negatives. So those will soon be accessible online to the public, but probably represents one of the more important photographic collections in the country that largely no one has seen before, which is pretty exciting.
Davison, can you share about the discovery of those 11,000 prints?
Yes, Jennifer, I'm so glad you asked. So if we continue around here, behind this door here, which is kind of fun, this was originally an exterior door from the studio to the outside. Later, Couse decides that he's going to wall this in and use it as a small closet. Well, he stacked all those nitrate negatives and all those contact prints back in their original Eastman Kodak boxes, arranged them chronologically here on shelves. And so they sat here from 1936 until the 1980s, when Virginia, the granddaughter of E.I. Couse, and her late husband, Ernest, discovered them for the first time and realized that that entire treasure trove was here. They then rehoused them and put them in a freezer, because cellulose nitrate negatives are highly flammable and combustible. And we've now been, as I mentioned, digitizing all of those. So yeah, an amazing resource. And also amazing because during that period, many artists, the estate of the artist would destroy the photographs because the photographs were in some ways seen as cheating, because of course the myth of the artist is that they're inspired by the muse of creativity. And therefore photographs were seen as kind of, well, that's kind of a way to cheat. But it's fortunate that these all have survived, because of the 11,000, 6,000 of those are studies for paintings that were never realized. And then the remainder are great snapshots of Taos Pueblo, Acoma Pueblo, Taos during this period. So really important photographs that we're excited to begin researching and sharing with the public. I also want to note behind me these beautiful gilt frames that Mr. Couse has at the ready, waiting for future canvases to be completed. And I want to point out this beautiful frame here on the bottom is a great example of an original Couse frame. Couse was the only artist of the Taos Society of Artists who actually designed his own frames. He would do a sketch, and then his frame makers in New York would carve and cover in bronze powder these frames. And this one we actually discovered during the pandemic. We did a deep clean of the studio, and this was still in a crate, and it had been in a crate since 1936. And if you look closely at the bottom, the label on there says Grand Central Galleries, New York. And that was one of the most important art galleries of the period that all of the Taos artists aspired to be represented by. So here we have an original period Taos frame waiting to be filled, which is a good segue to this painting here. Planting Prayer Plumes depicts Jerry Mirabal at Blue Lake, the sacred lake of Taos Pueblo, and has a really exquisite Couse frame wrapping around it. But one of my favorite paintings in our collection, I believe Couse's nocturnes are among the best in the country. Someday we're going to have to do a nocturne show where we could really compare all the artists that are painting the West and how they interpret the night.
That sounds like a wonderful opportunity for collaboration.
Yeah, wouldn't that be fun, Jennifer? Yeah, you guys have some great pieces in your collection, I'm just saying. So speaking of his artistic process, the photography, bringing the models back to the model stand, Couse also learned early on that if he wanted his models to return the next day with the same outfit on, it might be easier if he just acquired Native American clothing for his artists. So we now have a great collection of Plains and Plateau beadwork here at the museum. These are a nice example of Plains moccasins dating to about 1880, 1890s, beaded on the bottom, but absolutely exquisite. And these are a really great example of what was traded into Taos. Taos was one of the most important trade centers during this period and had been for hundreds of years because of its geographic location, because this is really, Taos is where the plains and the plateau meet.
Davison, we have lost sound for you. I still don't have sound for you, Davison. It looks like Jake is gone. It's muted. There we go. There you are. Now
Can you
you're
hear me
back.
now?
Yes.
So I think I was talking about trade, and that these were a great example of material that was traded into Taos. And so that people were coming from the plains, the plateau. So you had Kiowa, Comanche, Arapaho, you had Navajo, Apache, all traveling to Taos to trade. The San Jeronimo Feast Day, late September, was actually a 2-week trade fair. So people were coming from everywhere. And this is what the artists had at their fingertips. They didn't have to travel to the plains and the plateau to acquire this beautiful beadwork, because this was some of the most coveted material in the West and could all be found at Taos. And it's often a misnomer. People say, well, why did Couse dress his models as plains warriors? And if you notice this painting here, his Pueblo models have 2 braids on their hair, as similar to plains culture. But actually, Taos Pueblo men are the only Pueblo people that wear 2 braids to this day, as opposed to the single chongo behind your head that most of the other Pueblo men wear. And it's because of that affinity and close relationship with the plains culture. There was a lot of intermarrying and a lot of cultural exchange.
You mentioned the scene at Blue Lake. Would you speak about the significance?
Yeah.
Yes, question about Blue Lake. So Blue Lake is the spiritual home of Taos Pueblo. It's located up on high above Taos Mountain. And it's a very important kind of watershed moment in Native rights and sovereignty. In the early 20th century, the federal government took back that land from Taos Pueblo. And not only was it their spiritual center, it was also the watershed for the entire Taos Pueblo. It was also where most of their food came from, hunting, other than what they were growing through agriculture. And there was a prolonged fight on the part of Taos Pueblo to have that land returned to them in their control, as the National Forest Service had taken it over. So that happens in what, 1974, Richard Nixon? What is it?
1970.
1970, thank you. 1970, that is formally returned to Taos Pueblo. And that was a watershed moment in Native rights and sovereignty. It was the first time that Native lands were returned to Native people, and is inspiration today for other Native people to have control of their lands returned to them. So yeah, Blue Lake is symbolically and literally very important to the people of Taos Pueblo and to Native American culture today.
Thank you, Davison.
You got it. You got it. Very good question.
Yes, well, we are it's 12:53. I wanted to give people a chance if they had any other additional questions to add. We've had some great ones along the way here, certainly. And this has been an incredible tour, Davison. It really is quite incredible what we can do virtually these days.
Yeah, no, and there's so much more. I do want to let people know that we've only gone through 5 rooms of the Couse House. There's 11 rooms in the Couse House alone. 3 of those rooms tell the Kibbe Couse story, which is pretty fascinating. It's a complete right turn or left turn, depending how you look at it. But he was a mechanical engineer who develops a mobile machine shop that winds up playing a very significant role in World War II. We also have the Sharp Studios, the Luna Chapel and his 1950 studio, and we now have the Lunder Research Center, a 5,000 square foot museum facility that's an archive, research center, library, and exhibition space. So with that, before we wrap up and take questions, I just want to encourage folks that this was only a teaser. So you really have to come and do the full experience.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Sarah, I see you nodding. Do you have any questions or anything you'd like to add today, Sarah? Sarah Boehm, our curator, is here from the Stark Museum of Art with us.
It's just a great experience to see the whole house and the Sharp chapel as well in the context of Taos. Yeah, wonderful spot for a pilgrimage, as Davison said.
Right. Well, very good. Well, I think that is going to be all for us today. I appreciate all of you joining us for our first program of the year here at the Stark Museum of Art. And on the last day of our exhibition, The West is Home, we are so glad to have it. And what a treat to be able to spend a little while in Couse's home and studio as we kind of wrap up our time with that special exhibition, The West is Home.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure to partner with you all on that exhibition. And yeah, again, encourage folks, come pay us a visit.
All right. Well, thank you all and have a great afternoon. And we look forward to seeing you at our next Lunch and Look at Home.